kicking off by redefining what ADHD actually is. Not what we've been told by our friends, not what we've been told by our neighbor or by our family members or by our teacher, but really breaking it down by science-backed practices and strategies on what ADHD actually is. And here at My Graceful Chaos, we look at ADHD as a superpower and how we can use the ADHD brain to thrive in our everyday life, whether that be at school for our children or for home or work and life balance for us as adults. So let's redefine this ADHD thinking and narrative that society has brought on in recent years. And yes, there is a recent influx of diagnosis of ADHD students, but it's not by coincidence. So let's break this down. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of what exactly ADHD is, because we know that it's obviously an imbalance and just a different way that our brains are working. People generally that do have an ADHD diagnosis, they have very, very strong, predominantly strong skills that are right brain hemisphere oriented, right? So what does that mean? They are very creative. They like to build. They like to find problems to solutions, right? If you ask someone who has a formal ADHD diagnosis to give you a solution to whatever problem, they're going to come up with 10 different solutions, not just one. The opposite of that is very linear thinking, right? And what's the problem in today's schools is they are built for a very linear, systematic way of thinking. So let me take you all a couple years back before we dig deeper into ADHD and the science behind it. Let's get to know me. I was actually just diagnosed with ADHD at 36 years old. And when I finally got the diagnosis, it was like a light bulb moment went off for me in both my career, in my personal life, at home, as a wife, as a mom, as a friend. I mean, everything in my life literally just started to make sense. Looking back, my life as a kid growing up in school, it was not easy in the sense that like my B's did not come easy. Like I worked, I had to bust my butt for those A's and B's. It didn't come naturally. And then I always felt, I don't know, different, like always an outsider looking in, because in my eyes, it came so easy to everybody else, right? To at least all my friends in my friend group, right? Getting A's or being organized or, doing well and having good study habits just came so easily to everybody else. Why didn't it come easy to me? What was wrong with me, right? So then I started questioning just my potential as a student, as a person, where I just started questioning my potential. And again, it wasn't until obviously years and years and years later and life experiences and having my own child diagnosed with ADHD and all of the other things and my experience in education, where now I realize that all of those years in school when I was a child, I was masking. I was simply masking my ADHD because I didn't know how else to fit in with the norm. I didn't know how else to fit in with what society at the time and still seemed normal. So that's where it all clicked for me and my life all started to make sense. And I had what to this day I can only refer to as an awakening, where literally everything was just like, oh, wow, that's why I did this. That's why I have those habits. That's why I made that decision. It's everything just made sense. And with that, I do want to recommend, and I want to pause here just for a second, because one recent book, I've been really immersed into my reading and research lately. And one book that I do highly recommend that ties in so perfectly with my own testimony and my own ADHD diagnosis. Okay, so I had to look it up for a second, but one of the ones that I highly recommend is Now It All Makes Sense by Alex Partridge. And this is his life story of how an ADHD diagnosis brought clarity to his life. And reading his account and his experiences and what he went through, I felt like I was literally reading like my own life through somebody else's words, more or less, with obviously slight differences. But it was just, it's nice to know that you're not alone. with your adult ADHD diagnosis. The problem is that for years, I mean, I'm a 90s baby. So, during that time where I grew up going to elementary school, middle school, there was a pretty big stigma with someone having ADHD. Even so, we're still getting a very negative connotation on the word. And it is primarily because we are not well educated on the topic. And I am here to completely shift that narrative of ADHD being a problem case or being a deficit of any kind or being a disorder. It is a design. It is a new design and a completely different blueprint of how your brain sees the world. And that is not a bad thing. So I mentioned before that, ADHD brains, the way that we think, the way that we operate is the complete opposite of a linear, systematic way of thinking. So, and that is where the right brain hemisphere and the left brain hemisphere come in. But we'll do a completely different episode on that topic because that's going to be a big one. But I want to share with you guys just really quick some strategies that can really help and just to give you some insight on how you can figure out what your triggers are and how to actually work with your brain instead of against it, because that's the whole point here, right? So if you're here and you're watching and you've subscribed to my channel, you either have ADHD or someone that you know and you love has ADHD, and you're trying to figure out how to best help yourself live a fulfilling life or your child or someone that you love. So the first thing, before I give out any tools, tips, strategies, anything like that, you have to get to know your brain. So yes, we know that you have ADHD or your child or whomever, right? That's the first step. Okay. But now we need to figure out like the specific blueprint, right? What exactly triggers our dopamine, or what exactly triggers us into a emotional spiral? Okay. So first of all, before we get into all of those, I want to also point out, because part of the reason why ADHD sometimes gets such a bad rep in schools, among teachers, among professionals, among family members, among different social groups, is because of the behavior that is attached to ADHD. And that's because of the impulsivity. So ADHD brains are impulsive because of the way that the executive functioning part of the brain operates. So all of this takes place in the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And in a child or an adult with ADHD, that part is underdeveloped. And it's usually delayed by at least 2 to 3 years. That doesn't mean that there is anything wrong. It just means that we need to take precautions and use proper strategies and tools that I will share with you here to help increase and help strengthen that part of the brain. Okay. But it is important to understand that there are scientific biological differences in the way that an ADHD brain is wired. There are models and pictures and graphs and scans to show you the different sparks in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And again, this is all where the emotional regulation part of a child or of an adult is housed in the prefrontal cortex. So if you're thinking, let's say a child of 10 years old that has ADHD and struggles with impulsivity, emotional regulation, lashes out when things don't go their way, and that's not exactly typical 10-year-old behavior for whatever the incident was, right? You have to think to yourself, if that child has an ADHD diagnosis, their emotional regulation capabilities are already slightly delayed by 2 to 3 years, scientifically speaking, which means that they're going to react in that specific scenario. They're going to react in comparison developmentally, emotionally developmentally, in comparison to, let's say, a 7-year-old. So when you look at it in that context, it helps you understand and have empathy, right? Which is what is personally what I feel is lacking so much in so many schools because there is not enough awareness around this. And because there's no awareness, there's a lack of empathy. Your brain, you got to look at dopamine triggers, okay? What exactly is going to give you that boost of dopamine that your brain craves? ADHD brains crave dopamine, okay? We cannot sit there, I cannot sit there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes straight and work on something consistently without taking some kind of movement break, okay? That could be different for everybody, whether it's listening to music, getting up and walking around, going outside, whatever that is for you. But you have to know what that is for you specifically. So design your day around your energy. So what are your high level energy days? Mine are at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay. And it sounds crazy to other people, but that's what works for me. And that's what works for my brain. So what are your high energy moments of the day? For some people, it's at midnight when everyone else is asleep. Your husband's asleep, your wife is asleep, your kids are asleep, everybody's asleep, and that's your me time. But everybody's different. Everybody has their pockets of time throughout the day where they have that peak energy. Use that to your advantage. And last but not least, to build a system that actually works for your brain, not against it. And this is such a big one for me because recently, after I had my fifth baby and I got back into shape and I lost all that weight and everything, and then I started the business and all of these different things started happening. And for years, I struggled with getting back in shape or with finding an organization system at home that worked for me or whatever the case was, because I was following other people's systems. But once I started building my own system for losing weight, my own system for getting back on a healthy habit, or my own system for organizing my home, or my own system for organizing my kids' sports, it wasn't somebody else's. It was my own. So once I created my own system for all of those different areas of my life, everything just started to make sense again, and everything started to flow as it should because I created that system. But again, you've got to know how your brain works first, what your dopamine triggers are, what might send you into an emotional regulation spiral, how to calm yourself down from that. So those are all things that come with awareness. So I hope that you've enjoyed our talk here today. If this episode spoke to you, please like, share, subscribe, share it with someone who you feel needs to hear this message so that they know they're not alone and their brain is not broken and they are brilliant. I'm your host, Katrina Delafe, and this is your reminder that chaos can be beautiful and your mind is made to thrive. And don't forget to subscribe to My Graceful Chaos, Empowering ADHD Minds to Thrive, and never miss an episode.